Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to start this webinar. Welcome to you all. Thank you for joining. As I said a few moments ago, we've got about 150 people who've booked. The numbers are going up all the time, but delighted to welcome you to this Go-to-Market Global webinar on US legal and economic intervention. Over the last 3 years, GTM Global has helped over 3,000 UK scale-up businesses connect to resident in-country experts to enable them to go to market globally. The recent COVID-19 crisis, though, has meant that many UK firms are reassessing their international expansion strategies. And with this in mind, we've invited our US partner organizations, Thorelli and Associates in Chicago and IMS in Tucson, Arizona, to provide us with some prescient advice on some of the key legal and economic interventions that are affecting UK businesses trading into and with the US. But before I introduce you to Tom and Antoine, I'd also like to welcome Laurie Spicer from the Department of International Trade. And she'd like to say a few words on what the UK government advice that's available through the International Trade Trade Advisor Network is here in the UK right now. Laurie, over to you.
Hi, Laurie, you're just muted at the moment.
Great, got it. So hello everyone, thanks Mark. My name is Laurie Spicer and I'm an international trade advisor with the Department of International Trade. So for those of you on the call who aren't familiar with us, DIT are the government agency that is responsible for supporting UK companies looking to trade internationally. So now, really more than ever, we're supporting businesses who are dealing with the critical issues surrounding the coronavirus. And we appreciate that in these unprecedented times, businesses are really having to readjust their priorities. And this is to make sure that in some cases that they will just survive, and in other cases, perhaps really thrive in this time. So my role with the organization is to help businesses on a one-to-one basis, primarily to develop an export strategy, which will help them understand not only the challenges and barriers to trade, but also the opportunities that exist in whichever overseas market they're interested in. We have a network of international trade advisors who are across the country, and we're not civil servants. We come to the role with different sector expertise. But we all have commercial experience. So in my particular case, I'm a US citizen. I specialize in the US market, and prior to joining DIT 6 years ago, I ran my own IT services company that exported primarily to the EU and the USA. So if you'd like to speak to a trade advisor to go through issues that you're having, either with coronavirus or your international trade market selection, understanding whichever market, and here we're talking about the US, so we'll be providing details after the webinar, how you can get in touch with your local trade advisor. And just briefly, just to let you know, we do have staff overseas in over 100 different offices in the embassies, high commissions and consulates. And our staff really, especially at this time, are really perfectly placed to help you understand the current climate, what's happening in those overseas markets, in general business terms, but also how the markets are affected. Today we're talking about the US, so I'll explain later how our teams are structured in the US and how they can support you.
Thank you, Laurie. We really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd now like to introduce you to Tom Thorelli and Antoine Guillaud, both long-standing partners on the GTM International Expansion Program. Normally, they provide help and advice to UK companies in setting up and doing business in the US. But today, however, they're providing a briefing to you to get you up to speed with the recent US legal and economic interventions which will and are affecting UK companies. But in advance of this briefing, I'm going to ask each of them to give you a short background on their companies and their experience. Tom, Antoine, over to you in Chicago and Tucson.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much, Laurie, both. for inviting us to participate today. Hopefully we'll be able to impart some interesting information about what's taking place here in the US. Normally, Thorelli and Associates, we're a 5-lawyer firm in Chicago. We work primarily with small to medium-sized UK companies doing business in the United States, whether they're just getting started and want to protect their intellectual property, their trademarks, their confidential information, etc., negotiate contracts, whether it be sales terms, limited warranties, distribution agreements, joint ventures, acquisitions, employment agreements, pretty much all kinds of contracts, setting up companies. Should I set up a company? When should I set up a company? Why is Delaware talked about? Should I set up an LLC or a C corporation? All those kinds of issues. Immigration, one of our lawyers devotes 100% of her time to immigration issues. We've seen a few of the questions that have been asked before this event that relate to immigration. Hopefully we'll have a few minutes to address that. And then we try to keep people generally out of trouble. The way to use lawyers in the US is before you do business in a preventive capacity, which really is the major distinction between how lawyers are used in the US and in the rest of the world. Antoine?
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Antoine Guillaud. I'm the founding partner of International Management Solution, Inc. We're an accounting firm dedicated to assist European corporations setting up in the United States. So we essentially work with French, Belgium, and UK company coming to the US. So obviously, as all accounting firm, pretty much we do accounting, tax, and HR specialized for European corporation, as I said. Purpose today, objective today, answer most of your question. I see a lot of you have operation in the US and lots of legislation came through. Just a little word of warning. We keep getting new guidance and Q&A from the Department of Labor, from the IRS, from many Treasury and other agencies pretty much every day. We even got some more last night and this morning. So things keep on changing. It's pretty difficult, but Tom and I will do our best to give you an overview of what's going on and what's happening. To you, Mark.
Thanks, guys. So on this webinar, we've had, I think now, nearly 150 UK companies who registered, and many already have an entity or are actively trading with US companies or in the process of setting up there. And many, as we said, are reassessing their plans in the light of COVID-19. And with this in mind, I'd like to invite Laurie and Antoine and Tom just to give a bit of perspective, both on the ground in the UK and in the US, about what's going on.
Hey, that's a cue. So I think I'm really very interested to get. Gosh, I'm still muted. Hang on.
No, we hear you, Laurie.
No.
Now you've muted yourself.
You think I haven't done this before? Hold on. So as an advisor, I work one-to-one with businesses, and we've been talking to quite a lot of our businesses, obviously, as this crisis has unfolded. And, you know, we are coming up with issues with companies that they're saying that maybe their international expansion is going to be put on hold. They're worrying about furloughing their employees, what the resources are internally with the organizations. And we've talked to other companies who are still looking at, you know, making sure that they are doing their homework, doing the research in the markets that they're looking to, you know, to go into. I talk to a lot of businesses that are in the US. And, you know, the US is a really complicated market, and it isn't a market that should be it should be a market that you should research. So I think certainly in this time, I'm speaking to companies that are saying, you know, we're still going to carry on with our research. We still want to go to the US. We want to trade in the US. We want to understand what's happening in the US. And when Mark was discussing this webinar with me, I think it's a really good opportunity for businesses that are on the call to actually understand what support is available in the US. And I know that what Tom and Antoine are going to be talking about is mainly support that's given to US companies, but I think it's really important that our businesses understand how the US government are going to support their partners and also companies if they have subsidiaries in the US. So Tom, Antoine?
Yeah, very briefly, this is a case of first impression in the United States. Of course, like it is in the rest of the world, it's really hard to predict what is going to happen. There's tremendous frustration everywhere here in the US. The essential businesses are allowed to continue, and most of them are indeed continuing. One can apply to the government, each state government, for an exception to be deemed an essential company. But it's my guess is that I just made it back to the United States in the nick of time. I was in Europe and actually going to participate in a GTM Go-to-Market Global event on the 18th and 19th of March, and decided to shortcut the visit. My guess is that the US is very similar in terms of circumstances as it is in Europe, although we are not nearly as united because we are 50 states and we're the size of a continent. So some states have yet to call for a stay-at-home order or limit access to normal business. So it's going to be different in each state how we are reacting to the virus. Antoine?
Yeah, I mean, clearly it seems that in some part of the country, we're still not taking COVID-19 as seriously as we probably should, and it probably is in Europe. But amongst our clients, what are we seeing? I mean, quite clearly, whether essential or not, and by the way, essential is a lot larger than one may think, as, you know, if you are a supplier to an essential business, you basically become an essential business. But whether essential or not, I mean, you know, everybody, a lot of the of our clients under a stay-at-home order, and so and in any case, they've obviously, like you probably did, they've seen a drastic reduction in activity. So pretty much every manufacturing plant is idle or pretty much closed. Then lots of the office people are working from home, and you know, unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of furlough and probably going to layoff. But as well, for most, you know, let's say software companies and service company engineering type, lots of people are kind of waiting to see what the package, what the assistance package are, and how it goes. I mean, I think a lot of company can probably live with 2-3 months. That's probably maybe a stretch, but you know, before the economy restarts, so lots of people are just waiting to see what's going to happen. So the next few weeks are going to be absolutely key. Mark?
Thanks, Antoine. Thanks, Tom. So today's webinar, we're going to break into 2 parts. Tom and Antoine will now give us an overview on the current legal and economic interventions and their status across the US. And then we're going to have a Q&A session. Now, we already have some questions that have been sent in on email, but we would very much like to encourage you to send us further questions on the Zoom text chat. So please, if you have some questions, please do send them in on the text chat as this presentation progresses. And also I want to say that the nature of this webinar is that we can't answer all your questions clearly in the course of the next hour or so, and some of the answers may well be generic. However, there is an opportunity after the webinar to schedule one-to-one conversations with Tom or with Antoine or with other members of our GTM Global Network Advisor Network, and we'll be in touch on email to schedule one-to-one meetings over Zoom for that purpose. So I'm going to, without further ado, ask Tom and Antoine to give us a 4-part presentation on those key issues that I know you will want to hear about. Tom, Antoine, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. Mark, I noticed that there are a number of clients of our firm that have signed up and are participating today. You think I can bill those people for this hour? Okay. All right. Maybe not so funny. All right, take it easy, clients. All right. So first of all, this is not legal advice. You know, all the good legal mumbo jumbo disclaimers and so forth. But it's not legal advice. It can't be legal advice because the law, as Antoine said, is evolving almost on a daily basis. We really don't know all that much about where we're going to be in a week or 6 weeks in terms of what the law is going to be. So it's a moving target. The idea is to provide you with some basic ground rules today and then answer questions. And indeed, those one-on-one meetings that Mark is offering to set up, those are going to be for free. I always have a tough time saying that word as an American lawyer. So there is also some interpretation that is taking place of the laws. But I want to start a little bit out of order here to talk about the Paycheck Protection Program. The Paycheck Protection Program is an extraordinary, unique offering that is being run through the Small Business Administration here in the U.S. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And what it is it's a relatively short application form whereby you can apply at a bank that is SBA compliant or signed up with the SBA, and most American banks are signed up with the SBA, where you can obtain 2.5 months of salary and rent as a loan from the SBA, which is intended, of course, to help tide you over during the pandemic. Hopefully it doesn't last any longer than that. And if you keep your employees, or 75 or 80% of your employees, or if they're on leave, that they come back at the end of the 2.5 months, then it's likely, although it's certainly not a sure thing, the loan will be forgiven. And that's an extraordinary opportunity that I encourage all of you that have subsidiaries in the United States to look into when we get off this webinar, because it is likely sort of a first come, first served situation. Our firm, we're a small firm, we're doing fine today. We do not know what things will look like in a month or 2 months, just like nobody else does. And so we have decided to apply for that loan as well, and that is in process right now. Antoine, anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe some details. I mean, you know, to be able to apply for this Paycheck Protection Program, you need to have less than 500 employees, and that's all the employee of your group or company or group in the United States. Foreign owned is okay, and it's new. It's okay by the law, but I must admit, I must say that right now, most of the application of our clients are kind of stopped by the SBA, because the SBA system, electronic transmission system between banks and the SBA is expecting, as the normal SBA loan, to for corporation at least owned by 51% by US concern. So there is a mechanical issue. We believe it's a mechanical issue, but so, I mean, if some of you have already submitted application, you've come across those difficulties. So that should, we hope that should be lifted in the coming days. But I mean, there is this incertitude, and I think you need to know that. You must have been in business on February 15, and of course you need to be impacted by the COVID-19. As Tom says, 2.5 times the average monthly payroll. There was lots of discussion on what was the basis for the loan. So it's 2.5 times average monthly payroll. So that's your gross salary plus employers' healthcare premium plus 401k or any other employer contribution to the pension fund. Interest rate is great, 1%. It's 2 years maturity, so no payment before 2 years. You must use the funds for payroll, interest on mortgage, utilities, or rents. And on the forgiveness, as Tom said, basically, if you use those funds, I mean, for 8 weeks of payroll, rent, I mean, those expenses I mentioned, 8 weeks of those costs will be forgiven. You must keep your employees if you, and there is two things. One is the number of employees, the head counts. If the head counts is reduced by 25%, you will have 25% reduction in the forgiveness. Now, the details on how that's going to happen are kind of sketchy, but that's a principle that the idea at this point, the SBA or the Treasury will give some more guidance on that at some point. You can reduce salaries by 25% without penalty at this point, but if you reduce salary by more than that, there will be a reduction of loan in the forgiveness of the loan as well. Typically, US, I guess, if you've already fired your people or laid them off or furloughed, you can rehire them. In practice, what it means is that a lot of US corporations are basically waiting for the loan to come back in to rehire their people and keep them for at least 2.5 months. So that's my...
And Antoine, just a quick question I've got coming already. You have to be a US citizen for this or not? Or
that's the entire question. By the law, we believe, many other accounting firm, law firm, we believe then the only criteria is then it has to cover US-based employees. Okay, so it can only go for US-based employees. The first form, the first questionnaire, application form from the SBA mentioned shareholders limitation of foreign owners. They changed that form like on Thursday last week, and that question was erased. So we do believe the law opened this special protection program to foreign-owned business, but there is indeed difficulties right now to get the loan for such companies through.
That's my understanding as well, Mark, that there was an issue about over 20 or 25% foreign ownership, but that has been eliminated as a qualification for obtaining the loan. So our advice to all our clients is to damn the torpedoes and get the application on file, get in line, and then see what happens. It's a pretty straightforward form to prepare.
Yeah, it's on a first come, first served basis to do indeed, and it's through your bank, also an SBA approved bank. So please contact the bank and get the process started. So you're on the queue. I think that's very important. Very limited information. Everything you need to do to give is basically your payroll information. I will probably ask you as well for tax return and for bylaws, but that's about it. And remember, no personal guarantees. So it's certainly worth getting into the queue. Whether you will be able to get it or not, I mean, I don't know. We believe the law says yes. Mechanically, there is some problem right now, but not only for foreign-owned business. I mean, throughout the press, problems are reported in the process for getting the loan for every business. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, Chase is our bank, and we've been banking with them for 30 years since I set up the firm. And it's going to take a lot of time. And nobody knows, just like everything with this COVID-19 situation, is that nobody really knows how long it's going to take. But the government has really taken a big step in our view, and it's something that you ought to seize upon if you can. Moving along to the issue of employee management, there is no legal definition in the United States of furlough. Antoine is going to use the term furlough in his part of this presentation, but in large part in the United States, furlough has no real significance. So people, even laid off is a term that can be interpreted. Laid off generally means fired, but it can also mean laid off, laid to the side, and may be called back at some point in the future. I believe that furlough in the UK has legal significance, namely leaving work full time, but continuing to receive benefits or otherwise be able to take advantage of certain benefits from the government or from the company, healthcare or otherwise. So use the term furlough advisedly if you're talking with people in the United States, because they're really not going to understand. You're going to have to be very specific with your employees as to what you are talking about when you talk about furlough. Very few people in the United States have written employment agreements. It is a fundamental distinction between how people are employed in the United States from Europe and pretty much the rest of the world. In the US, almost everybody is employed at will, namely that the company can fire whenever they so desire, with or without cause, and the employee can up and leave from one day to the next without any advance notice to their employer. Now, that does not mean you can discriminate or wrongfully terminate someone, but within the scope of COVID-19 today, essentially, the rules of at-will employment continue to apply. So if you have employees that you feel you don't have anything for them to do today, you can, quote, furlough them. Again, not meaning anything. Tell them, I simply can't pay you right now. Please go home. Please derive these enhanced unemployment compensation benefits that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, and we'll get right back to you as soon as the dust settles and the virus passes on. Those are, so essentially, you can still fire people now if they're at will and don't have an employment contract or are not subject to a collective bargaining agreement, namely part of a union. And most of our clients are small to medium sized, and as a result, their employees are not unionized. Well, now there are some exceptions, and that is if now under the COVID Act, there is an opportunity for someone to take a leave of absence based on the COVID Act list of qualifications to take that leave of absence. It's an expansion of the Family Medical Leave Act, and it allows for an expanded array of circumstances, obviously relating to COVID-19, for people to take a leave of absence. When they take the leave of absence, then their job is protected. So if you are considering, I hate to say this, but if you're considering firing anyone in the United States, my recommendation is that you do that sooner than later, because the word is going to get out that employees can have this enhanced Family Medical Leave Act opportunity to take 2 weeks of paid leave of absence from the company and have their job protected. So better to let them go now than to wait for them to take the leave. Now, there are exceptions to that as well. And for example, one of these examples, obviously, tending for someone who has the virus, if someone is feeling sick or otherwise is not able to come to work, etc., then that obviously is covered. But so are individuals that have to stay at home to take care of their kids because their kids are home from school and the school is closed. So that is a legitimate cause today. It didn't used to be before the COVID Act for people to stay at home. There's a sort of sick leave act. I'm calling these by acronyms or shorter names that also provide for these first 2 weeks of leave of absence as being paid under the Family Medical Leave Act. Generally, the first 2 weeks are not paid, but here they are. Antoine?
All right, yeah, I need to unmute first. Okay, yeah, so, I mean, on these, when considering employees, I mean, something to keep in mind, though. I mean, you know, we've been building teams. It was really difficult to build our team in the past years. I mean, with unemployment, with the low employment rate in the US, and now this, unfortunately, we have to let them go. Keep in mind, though, that we're still seeing some company trying to come to the US, and they're taking advantage of the situation. Some headhunters are really busy recruiting our people. So something to keep in mind. But what's important to keep in mind when you're thinking about dealing with your employees, first of all, we have two main categories of employee in the US. We have what we call exempt and non-exempt. Exempt are typically people who are on monthly or twice monthly wages, and then we have the hourly people. Hourly people, by definition, paid by the hour. Exempt people, salaried, you know, they're paid for the work done more than for the hour. Keep in mind that if they work a few hours during the week, the entire week is owed. Okay, and there is a federal minimum wage for salaried people of about $684, I believe. So that's important. Furloughed versus layoff. I know, Tom, maybe we'll have a little different view here, but typically what we understand is layoff is definitive. When you lay off, fire somebody, you need to pay all outstanding vacation, accrued PTO, sick days. I mean, that's a company sick days, not the the CARE Act sick days. So everything needs to be paid off. Typically, when you furlough an employee, they will understand that the idea is to have them come back. And typically, they keep their benefits, healthcare, that during the period they are furloughed. Although you can't abuse it, you know, typically a judge would consider it after probably 2 to 3 months of furlough is a layoff, and you have to pay off all the accrued vacation, etc. What's interesting with furlough, obviously, that it can be partial. You can furlough people for some days or some hours during the week. So, I mean, with some firms, companies being under stay-at-home orders, but being essential. I mean, some have to have some personal. A key issue, even if you've reduced the number of hours tremendously of the workforce, of the production workforce, or warehouse workforce, keep in mind one of your main issues is probably potential workers' compensation claim with people getting the virus on your premises, or vendors or customers coming in. So lots of new guidance and rule on this, and Tom, maybe you want to talk a bit about that at some point, but very, very important to do everything possible, follow all the guidelines to protect as much as you possibly can those employees who would come into your premises. For the non-exempt, for the exempt, sorry, so for the wages people, what we see, I mean, when they can't work from home, when there is not enough work, I mean, what tends to happen with most of our clients is that they switch those people to an hourly kind of position, at least for the duration of the furlough. And so instead of having to pay them for the entire week, where they may just be working half a day or 2 days, following up their emails or answering a few phone calls, they switch those people to hourly and basically reduce their salary, but obviously they keep their benefits. So lots of exempt people switch to non-exempt, basically switch to hourly for the duration of the furlough. As well, Tom alluded to this aspect, but one of the things to keep in mind is then part of the CARE Act. So the unemployment benefits are tremendously expanded, additional weeks, like 13 more weeks, and moreover, $600 additional flat, additional compensated unemployment benefit. So what does it mean? If we take the example of California, where the minimum wage is $13 an hour, basically, the typical minimum salary worker would get benefits of $240 plus $600 pandemic benefits that come up to a total of $840. So basically per week. Okay, so if that person, that individual, is unemployed, getting the unemployment benefit will get $840, while if he was working, he will get $520. Basically, the tipping point here is for a $52,000 annual salary. You would get a benefit, unemployment normal benefit of you would get of $450. So you would get $1,140. So you know, so between $1,000 a week compared to $1,040 unemployed. So be careful, especially with the PPP program, where you need to keep your head count. You may have people who end up rather be on furlough and be unemployed because the salary can be different. The income can be very different. Again, 840 compared to 520 for the minimum wage person. So that's a big deal. Just a few words. Tom mentioned the emergency paid sick leave and the additional FMLA. Keep in mind, if the work site is closed, it's not due. There is many other state-specific provision, and businesses with less than 50 employees can be exempt, but only exempt if they can show then this would providing those benefits would have a very bad impact, and the business will not be able to be sustained. So you need to document why you give the exemption. And just, that's without wanting to go into too much detail, but obviously this emergency paid sick leave or FMLA plus, there is tax credit available, which maxed out, like, depending what it is, what the reason, to between $5,000 and $10,000. And I think that's about it, Tom.
Well, thank you, Antoine. It's always good to have somebody that knows the details and the execution of these types of new laws and the impact that they have. When it comes to, just to touch briefly on this workman's compensation, this is a legal requirement for all American companies to have. And all our law firm does is work with small to medium-sized European companies doing business in the United States. And sometimes companies fail to purchase workman's compensation insurance. So please make sure that you have it. One of the special reasons why that's crucial is because the officers and directors and shareholders could conceivably be held liable for the injuries that take place on their premises to employees or invitees. So please just make sure that you have that. Conserving cash is another one of the subjects that we wanted to address today. In addition to the Paycheck Protection Program, there's an economic injury disaster loan program that is it's sort of a parallel to the Paycheck Protection Program. It includes a $10,000 emergency advance and that is, under appropriate circumstances, forgivable. The loan is, you can borrow, of course, substantially more than that, depending on your qualifications for the loan. And the interest rate is 3.75%. As it turns out, that's relatively close to what the going rate is for borrowing money here in the United States. So it's not as if it's a panacea, but the qualifications are less stringent than one would normally confront at one's neighborhood bank. Antoine, you want to say something about that?
Well, I mean, obviously managing cash in these times is absolutely crucial. Just maybe to expand a little bit, just beside the specific U.S. government measure. I mean, keep in mind, you have clients in the U.S., you have maybe you have vendors. Very important to stay very close to them. Distance is not an excuse not to communicate. In the contrary, it's in the US, talk to those people, tell them the truth, tell them exactly at what point you are, you need more delay. I mean, a lot of our clients are keep calling their leasing companies, their credit card companies, and they're getting, they're getting time to pay their bill until the end of June. So please do call, make arrangements, and same on your client side, make sure they pay you on time. If they're not, call them, see what's going on, but just stay very close to your client. I mean, I think that's an advice which can be applied anywhere, but in particular in the US, especially because you could be seen as a as a foreign business and you're far away. So just stay close to your business. Obviously, a number of the measures, take care of your vendors and customers. Of course, a number of those measures coming from the US administration will help conserve cash. I mean, the main one is this famous April 15th deadline. On April 15th, typically all business with a tax year ended December 31st have to file a return and to pay the final tax 2019 tax amount and the Q1 2020 estimate tax payment. So all those obligation payments are pushed back to July 15th. Keep in mind that, as usual, the tax return can be postponed to October 15th, but the payment will be July 15th. That's does not include the Q2. Q2 is still due on June 15th. At this point, we expect that will probably pushed back to July 15 or later, most likely. That's a federal measure. Most of the states are coming on board, but there's still some which are not. But it will change the coming days most likely. Some other, and that's true for corporation as well as individuals, by the way. Some other measures, all employer payroll tax payment can be deferred to, so for that would be your payroll tax for the period up till the end of December this year, payable in 2 installments, 50% at the end of 2021, 50% at the end of 2022. So that can be a good program as well. Keep in mind, you cannot do this one as well as a PPP. It's one or the other. And then we have a retention credit, which which would be a 5,000 credit per employee you retain. This could be, again, you can do this one with a PPP, but in some cases, especially if you had a very low headcount or payroll in 2019, you hired in January and February, like one or two of our plans did, you end up with a very small PPP loan, so you're better off with that retention credit. Yeah. Okay, and that's pretty much the main tax measure I can see there, which can help a little bit with cash management. Tom, Mark?
Great. Then thank you also, Antoine, for what you said about being in touch with your American partners, telling the truth, being straightforward. One of the distinctions about Americans is that although we're hard chargers when it comes to business, we're also, most of us are pretty compassionate people. And understand that business is business, and this is impacting everybody worldwide. And the best way for us to get out of this mess is to with each other, and the best way to collaborate is to be straightforward. Naturally, you may want to have a chat with your lawyer if there's someone in the United States that's screaming for some equipment or for some product and is brandishing their sword, but essentially, cooler heads are prevailing here in the US for the time being, at least. And the idea is, as long as one is open and straightforward, that problems will be solved in the long run, and we'll all come out of this better than ever. That's a segue to talk a little bit about force majeure. Yes, I lived in France for a few years, so I speak some French. But force majeure is essentially a clause that can only be appealed to if it's part of your contract. So if those of you that are doing business in the United States, that are delivering products to the United States, check your contracts, check your sales terms and conditions, whatever documents that you have, the purchase orders of your US customers that you're filling, check those to see if there are any force majeure clauses. And even if there are force majeure clauses, there may not be a force majeure clause that is particularly suited to this circumstance. You can't just say, hey, we have a force majeure clause, and therefore we're going to appeal to it. If there is governmental action in your force majeure clause, again, this hasn't been tested, of course, because the courts aren't open right now. So, except for emergency matters. And as a result, these types of issues are about to be tested for the first time here in the US. But if there's a governmental order provision in the force majeure clause, that would be something that one might put one's hat on. But again, having a conversation perhaps with me offline tomorrow or Friday or next week about that might be something that would be worthwhile. Essentially, a force majeure clause can only be applied in the event that there's something that transpires that's outside the reasonable control of the breaching party. It was not a foreseeable event, which this certainly is not. It materially affects the ability of the breaching party to perform, and the breaching party has taken steps to provide notice and to mitigate whatever damage there might be. Again, that appeals to Antoine's statement earlier to be in touch with your American partners, customers, suppliers, etc., about your specific circumstances. Your contracts are going to have specific notice provisions. Please review those notice provisions and make sure that you adhere to those specific notice provisions. those sometimes can come back to bite you if you've just given someone a call and said, hey, here's our problem, and not followed that up with a communication that confirms what was discussed on the phone in a legal notice. There are a couple of other legal theories in the US, likely also in the UK, but I do want to underscore that Thorelli and Associates is a group of American lawyers and not UK lawyers. And that is impossibility of performance and frustration of purpose. And those both may end up being tested. All of these provisions, force majeure, impossibility, or frustration of purpose, are all very narrowly construed by courts in the United States. So just to say, well, you know, we couldn't perform because we couldn't get any raw materials, I'm sure a court will protect us. Well, keep detailed records of all the things that are happening that are preventing you from performing. Notify your American partners, but keep detailed records, because it's those records that will save you in the event of a conflict later on. Document, document, document. So this idea of impossibility relates to either the subject matter having been destroyed, and so there's a total frustration of the purpose of the contract, or now it's rendered impossible to perform, or there have been governmental orders or operation of law. The law has changed. Stay-at-home orders, those types of things may be possible to use in defending any claim of breach of contract based on the fact that it was impossible for you to perform under that contract. Anything you want to add to that, Antoine? Good, we'll keep him on mute then. All right, then I think it's back to you, Mark. I think we've given the summary that we had intended on giving. If there are any other issues, I know that there's some questions that include immigration and other things, and we'll be happy to the extent that we can to answer those. Otherwise, we can collect those questions and take those up with the participants in those one-to-one meetings.
Thanks, Tom and Antoine. We certainly have got some questions that have been sent in already. I was going to start with both a specific and a general, which was about the relationship between the federal and the state. And one of the questions we've got is, what is my company's duty to employees that we wish to let go in a state that has a stay-at-home order, but the state that doesn't have a stay-at-home order, how does that work? And secondly, if I can, which is a wider question, obviously there will be differences in approach to, say, California to Arizona or Illinois to New York on things like sales tax, you know, and incentives or issues. Can you give us some context on those issues, maybe, guys?
Antoine, can I take door number one and you do door number two?
Yeah.
And Mark, stop asking two questions at one time, because I'll never be able to remember the second question. All right, the first question. I think the stay-at-home order state is the most important one, because those states that do not have a stay-at-home order, likely the freedom to let people go will exist. However, in the stay-at-home order state, and even in the non-stay-at-home order state, the question really boils down to whether the employee in question has taken leave of absence under the COVID Act. Have they appealed to this expanded Family Medical Leave Act extension that has taken place here, effective the 1st of April, and notified the employer that they are taking leave of absence? Their job is protected during that time. Otherwise, they are, you can terminate them. So in the stay-at-home state, if the individual has not taken leave of absence, they are at home, whether they're working or not working, we believe, have a right to terminate them, as long as you're not doing it in a discriminatory fashion. Antoine, second question, which I don't remember.
The question was?
So Antoine, the question was really about the variance from state to state on things like sales tax and support.
I mean, I haven't seen anything coming across on sales tax at this point with regard to COVID-19. But obviously, every state, and especially New York State, actually, I mean, they are promoting, I mean, they're developing their own policies and own expanded sick days in particular and support to business. So, yeah, I mean, we couldn't, I mean, there is 50 states, there is probably 50 different program, additional program to support your companies. So you absolutely need to look into the states, the support offered by the various states in which you do business. Absolutely.
I echo that totally.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Antoine. Hello, everyone. Colin Stansbury from Avalara here. Sales tax is what we do, and we do it well. I've just popped in the chat with everyone a roundup of the different sort of file extensions, payment extensions, penalty waivers, and interest waived that's going on in each individual state. So click on that, have a look, and if you have any specific sales tax questions, you know, Mark will kindly direct them to me.
Colin, thanks. That's great. Thanks for that intervention. I've got some other questions here, guys. One of the questions, Tom, to you is around the travel restrictions. In terms of the US, for those with visas, what will happen when the current restriction runs out a week on Friday?
Well, you know, it depends on what your specific immigration status is, what type of visa that you have. We have some individuals that are, quote, stuck, close quote, here in the United States that are on the ESTA visa waiver program, and their authorized stay is running out. There's a way, for those of you that are interested, there's a way to get a one-time extension on that due to the impossibility of being able to leave the country for 30 days. That rule may ultimately be extended as well. You know, the essential issues about immigration are that the Immigration Service continues to work, but on a very, very delayed basis. Visas that were taking, well, first of all, the premium processing of L1 visas, O visas, H visas, etc., that were able to be done in 2 weeks and get a response within 2 weeks. That has been stopped for the time being. There's no way to get expedited treatment of a visa petition. Many consulates are closed for the time being, and therefore the e-visas and other B1, B2 visas, routine visas are currently essentially suspended. Largely because the people are not in a position to go to work because of the virus. And so there are other questions, like what about someone who's here on a visa and gets, quote, furloughed, namely the company wants to keep them on board but simply doesn't have the work for them. That would be treated on a state-by-state basis. Some states have expanded and made more lenient their unemployment compensation benefits to include individuals who are temporarily out of work that otherwise have work visas. But most states have not done that. And as a result, if someone has to be let go in the United States that has a visa, they essentially have 60 days to get out of the country, which of course is anybody's guess right now whether that is going to be able to happen or not.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, that's useful. I've got another question, I think, for Antoine around employee loans. And the question is around whether the employee is on contract or on payroll. Does it apply to both? And do you need a lending arrangement with your bank or just a checking account?
I'm not sure I understand the questions. I'm sorry.
Okay, let me
company lending money to its employees.
Yeah, let me just double check that. Sorry, I may have got the so basically this was around okay. So basically the subject of employee loans. can this apply to people we contract or just to people who are on the payroll? And must you already have a lending arrangement with the bank and not just a checking account to qualify?
I mean, you can always make employee loan to your employee. The question is whether it's going to be considered as compensation or not at some point. If the employee reimburses the loan and follows, and then the terms of the loan are normal, there is no particular issue there.
Okay. And another related question from a lady called Katia, who asks, who should apply for unemployment benefits, the employer or the employee?
The employee. It's on the employee. And that's why, I mean, maybe a related question. I mean, you know, you can't force people to take their vacation or to take their sick days. You can suggest to them that they do that, but you can't force them. That's a question we've had a lot. But if basically there is no work, it's not an FMLA, it's not a sick days, it's just unemployment. And the unemployment is basically the employee is going to the unemployment office and to get the benefit. And unfortunately, I mean, some part of the countries where I am right now, I mean, it's like about a month and a half before, I mean, you know, with a surge of application, the delay to get the first check is like enormous.
Okay. So
Mark,
sorry, Tom, did you want
to? About that loan issue, please make sure if you are lending money to your employee, do it, as Antoine has said, with a standard interest rate, payment plan, et cetera, and get it on a piece of paper. Essentially, have a loan agreement, something that is enforceable by the company and also defensible with the IRS.
Okay,
yeah,
so here's another question for you guys.
Forgiven, it will probably be considered compensation.
Okay. So here's another question. We have several US customers who we serviced remotely and have been planning this summer to set up a small operation in the US. Could you offer any advice in terms of what could be done to progress things in the short term so we have less to do when the lockdown is removed, hopefully, in brackets?
Antoine, may I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I know you're a lawyer.
All right, yeah, that's right. Sure, there's lots that can be done. Going back to what Thorelli and Associates does for a living, we protect intellectual property rights. The first thing you ought to do is protect your trademark. You'd be amazed, 60–70% of those that we meet have never registered their trademarks in the UK or in the EU, much less the United States. And you may think that you have a registration in the United States. Send me an email. Send me your list of trademarks and I'll get right back to you as to whether those trademarks are registered in the United States or appear to be available. Second thing, setting up a U.S. company. I'd be delighted, as would Antoine, to have an offline conversation with, should we set up a company now? Where should we set up the company? We've heard that a limited liability company is like a UK limited. Not. It is not like a UK limited. 90% of the time, we set up C corporations because those are more like a UK limited. But that's worth discussing as well. But setting up a US company would be an idea. Setting up the bank account. You can only set up a US bank account once the US company is incorporated and you have a federal tax identification number. We happen to have a relationship with a bank here in Chicago that based on the relationship of trust that we've built up over the last 30 odd years, they'll set up a bank account without the signers having to be present, which is something that your bank may tell you they'll be able to do, but it won't happen. You'll have to go to the United States to set up the bank account. So these are steps that can clearly be taken now so that you're ready to hit the ground running when the fog clears. Antoine?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much everything to do with setup in the US can pretty much done from overseas, and so there is no limit. You know, we can open the bank account, you can set up payroll, you can hire people. I mean, as far as you can do by video, everything technically can be done remotely. So, I mean, I don't think there is really any, in the contrary, I mean, we see lots of people who keep on working and probably have more time on their hand and spend more time in preparing to be all ready to go whenever they can, whether that's July, whether that's September. Mark, I just saw like in the question somebody asking, and maybe that's relating to your question, Ross Cooper asking, the Bank of America seems to want a lending arrangement and a checking account to qualify, I assume, with the PPP. So to answer maybe that's, if that's assuming that's a relevant question, you will, what we're noticing right now is that any corporation asking for a PPP need to go through their bank, and their bank, if their bank is SBA approved, and those banks basically work on their client first. We have a bank this morning who told us that they would only work with what they call prospect, meaning company with which they don't have an existing banking relationship after April 17 or 20th. So yes, if your bank is SBA approved, you go to your bank and you obviously have an account there, so that's no issue. If you bank with, I mean, I don't know, HSBC, KBC, or some other bank who are not SBA approved, you need to go to another bank. But unfortunately, you will most likely be in the queue and be served after their own clients. I don't know if that...
I've got another related question to the PPP here, Antoine. Let's assume that the upturn happens. Somebody's asked, I've heard that under the PPP, if there's a foreign owner excess of 20%, will that eliminate the chances to obtain the loan? Is it worth trying at least?
Well, this 20% question was raised, especially with the first application form which was released, where there was a clear question, and it stated, if you say yes to the question of more than 20% foreign owner, you will not receive the loan. That form was scrapped, and a new one was released, and all those ownership issues are gone. So, and as I say, our understanding by the law, foreign-owned business are eligible. Now, there is some mechanical issues. Which way is it going to end up? I don't know. What I think everybody, and Tom, I'm sure you approve, get in the queue. We don't really know which way it's going to go. Our understanding, our reading of the law, that you are eligible. We know there is mechanical issue with B of A. We know there is mechanical issue with First American Bank, with Chase. We don't exactly know where that's going to end up. So get in the queue, because the amount of funding is limited, and if you're too late, you won't get anything anyway. So get in the queue, it's worth it.
Okay, guys, well, thank you very much indeed. Have you got any other particular questions on the text that you want to answer? I'm very conscious of everyone's time, but also that we can do one-to-ones offline. But Antoine, Tom, any specific text chats that you want to answer before we wrap this?
I think I've said about what I know. So obviously there is more to discuss. I think the immigration issue is going to be very hot for lots of people, especially once the fog clears and people are ready to travel again. My guess is that the U.S. is going to make a number of exceptions in order to allow people to visit the U.S. But there's the wild card of if the virus continues to linger.
Antoine, any last thoughts from you, sir?
No, I mean, on that topic, I mean, when you see what's happening in China, I mean, clearly opening the border is a big issue with imported cases. So that's, you know, I don't think it's bode very well for international travel, frankly. And but we'll see. I mean, I don't know. Just another thing, I mean, we're publishing a lot on publishing not only, you know, our own stuff, but as well document prepared or articles prepared by various partners. So that's our website. So that should be able to answer a lot of your questions. So I've put in the chat for everybody our website, which is www.intlms.com. So don't hesitate to go there and sign up to our newsletter, and you'll be kept abreast of any developments.
Antoine, Tom, thank you very much indeed for all your sagacity and availability today. It's greatly appreciated. And thank you, Laurie, too, for all your inputs and support. Just a couple of things before we go to say this webinar is being recorded and it will be available afterwards on the GTM Global website. So anyone who hasn't seen it all can pick it up there. It's worth noting, and Tom always tells me this, that the advice that is given is general and not specific. But if you do want some specific advice and get some bespoke answers from Antoine and Tom and the other GTM advisors like Colin from Avalara, we will be sending an email out later after this event, and you can book a call. We just need to fix a schedule. So hopefully we can talk offline and get you to the right advisor so they can answer your questions specifically. So in the meantime, we hope you found this webinar useful in the understanding of US risks and liabilities, and then the upturn will come soon. In the meantime, we hope you and your families stay safe and healthy. And God bless America.